Hello, welcome to Phoenix Gaming. This is Chris, and today we're going to open up the general 40K playlist with a talk on the Warzone Nephilim GT. Before we get started, I'd like to make a few announcements. We hit 43 subscribers. We're almost to giving away the free shirt. Let's go! I'm also officially a Games Workshop employee. I'm super pumped about that. I'm on the events team now. I feel like the first event was a trial run, and then if they liked me, they were going to keep me. Now, they never really said that, but again, I just always kind of had that impression. So they invited me to work the Chicago Open and Nova. I think I'm going to be the kill team TO for the Chicago Open. Not 100% sure, but that's what it sounds like. And then Nova, I have no clue what I'm going to be doing, but I'm going to be down at DC for that, so that's going to be really cool. They've also offered me some extra work in between events, which I'm super happy about. That being said, I need to make it clear that this channel is in no way affiliated with Games Workshop. Obviously, we should all know that by now, but I just wanted to make sure I said that clearly and concisely. Awesome. I'm looking at maybe doing some paint and hobby streams, maybe some kit bashing streams. I don't know. Just something to kind of interact with the community. Excuse me, the community a little bit more. And then we're going to do some monthly game streams coming soon. I think our test run is going to be next week. I don't know if we'll actually go live for it. We may just do that as a test run and see how it goes. September 10th, I'm running a 1,000 point tournament. It's going to use all the rules you would normally use for a 2,000 point game. We're just going to have 1,000 point armies. And that's designed to help some of the newer players in the community kind of adjust to what tournament play would be like. 24 September, I'm going down to Indy to do an ATC, so I'm pretty pumped about that. A lot of things on deck coming up here. What is a war zone? Command point changes, secondary changes, army construction. So what is a war zone? We'll get into. All the other ones are the changes that happened for this war zone. So again, we're going to get into detail as we move on, as we do. What is a war zone? A war zone is the new GT packs. That's all it is. You know, they represent seasonal changes, a 6-month season in which they change some kind of interaction in the rules to kind of shift or sway tournament meta. I think it's a great way to kind of push towards or away from things without altering army core rules and without really changing the way the actual core rules of the game interact. A lot of times, actually, I think this is the first, or is this the second? Nachman might have been the first. I think Nachman was the first. So really the main things that change is what you can do for your army construction. And this one, we had some command point changes. Some of the list building options changed. All the missions generally stayed the same, but the secondary objectives also changed. Remember that these war zones only apply to matched play. So if you're a narrative or open play kind of person, you can just ignore those completely, unless obviously you just don't have opponents that'll play without them. So the big thing that everybody was worried about when it first came out was the command point change. Normally you'd start with 12 command points, and then your detachments cost command points, and then they get refunded based on the detachment and whether or not your warlord was in it. Now you start with 6 command points, and most of you already know this. I'm just a little late making the video on it. 6 command points for a standard 2,000 point game. You get 3 for smaller games. Your relics and warlord traits are no longer free, so you spend 1 command point to give your warlord a relic, 1 command point to give your warlord a trait. You don't have to spend either. You can just send them out there naked. That's fine also. If your warlord is a named character, 1 command point purchases all of their warlord traits. And the same would apply to relics, although I don't think any of them really have relics. I think they're all just baked into the data sheet for the most part. And then in any command phase, both players generate a command point. And what that means is if I have 6 command points and then you go first, in your command phase, you and I are both getting a command point. So I'll go to 7. It does not count against your 1 per battle round limit. And so you're generating multiple command points per battle round. I personally think this is going to place a greater emphasis on the armies that have warlord traits and relics that generate command points. Not all of them have them, or if they do, a lot of them are faction locked. Like Tau have one where if you use a specific type of stratagem on a 3-up, you get a command point back. Um, I think, was it Trajan maybe? One of the Custodes guys has something, and it may just be a generic Warlord trait or relic, but there's an interaction in there where on like a 5-up or a 4-up, you get a command point back when anybody uses a stratagem. Obviously, Guard has an interaction like that, but they're still an 8th ed book. So there's a lot of things like that. I think it's going to place a greater emphasis on that because, you're starting with half as many command points. Yes, you're generating them a little bit faster, but you're still playing the game with less overall. I think it comes down to like 1 or 2 less. And then not only are you playing with less overall, starting with less means you need something if you want to hit those like big combos. But I think that was the intent behind lowering the command points, was to kind of limit those combos. Obviously, your army construction changed a little bit. You get a free super heavy auxiliary detachment now, as long as it shares a faction keyword with your warlord. I don't know what level of faction keyword it needs. I don't have the book right in front of me. But, like if your Death Skulls and then your Gorkanaut has the Death Skulls keyword, like they both you get it for free. I don't think it's Orc. I don't think it's the big faction keyword. I think it's the sub faction. But correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I don't normally play with super heavy auxiliaries, so it's not a rule that I've invested a lot of time into making sure I know. No more empty transports. So if you take a transport, it has to have a unit in it before it hits the table. If it does not, it is destroyed, and it is treated as being destroyed and removed. So it's one of those where this is really good because certain factions just have really good and efficient transports. Elves, the Wave Serpent is basically a tank with a transport capacity, and also not that expensive for what you get out of it. It effectively has a quantum shielding ability. It can carry, I think, 11 models, maybe 12. But then also, it's just a tank. It's effectively like a predator. But you, because it's a dedicated transport, can actually take as many of them as you want, as long as you have an infantry unit for every one that you take. So you could take 5 wave serpents in a list and just be like, I got 5 tanks, ha 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 ha. So this kind of limits that. I think the Marines had a land speeder that had a very similar interaction where they were really cheap and efficient for what you got out of them. To me, the second biggest change was the changes to secondaries. I think the biggest change was the change to command points. Every category lost an objective, like Stranglehold's gone, To the Last is gone, and then I think Pierce the Veil's gone, and then like 1 or 2 other ones. But what they do then is they've made secondary objectives for most categories for all the armies, and then you can take as many faction-based secondaries as you want. And then a lot of those got changed and tweaked also. So some of the armies had some kind of poopy ones, and some of them are still kind of poopy, but they've made them at least better, or you can at least build around them. And again, I'm an orc player first, so that's what I'm going to talk about because that's what I know. Get the good bits. Generally was situational. You could probably get 8 points out of it on the right mission before. And now you can build around it. You're probably still not getting 15 on it, but you could still build around it to score it consistently. It no longer becomes situational. You know, so you could say, all right, I can just plan on taking get the good bits, and it just gives you more consistent scoring that you can rely on. And I think that's generally what they tried to do with a lot of the secondaries, is give you more consistency to them. Obviously you still have some armies that have some auto takes. Um, I don't know if the Drukhari one changed, where you get, what is it, like 2 points for every table quarter your opponent isn't in at the end of your turn, but you couldn't score at turn 1. I don't know if that one changed, but if it didn't change, it's still an auto take, because like they can generally kill things well enough to clear out 2 quarters every turn, and you're gonna score well on that if you can do that. If you can hit 10 points on that secondary, you're money. So overall, my take on Nephilim, I love the command point change. I hate alpha strikes as a mechanic. I understand that this game is predicated around you go, I go, and that's fine. I don't have an issue with that. Like I know a lot of people want to see an alternating activation. I honestly don't care either way. I just want to roll dice and have fun. What I don't want to see is Warhammer become just a copy of every other modern war game out there. So I hopefully, if Games Workshop does change that, they put their own spin or twist on it to kind of make it unique. But love the command point change. I hate strat bombing turn one. I'm not a big fan of strats anyway. Like I understand why they exist, but again, coming from the perspective of an orc player, where I've seen so much of my data sheet get stripped away and then turned into stratagems, it just kind of looks and feels bad. So it's one of those where knowing that I can go into a game and I don't have to worry about you dumping 8 command points turn one to try to eliminate most of my army, and knowing that I don't even have a combo that would let me even come close to doing that, it helps kind of ease that tension for a competitive aspect. Obviously you're going to have players that still do it. You're going to have players that can do it or armies that can do it, and that's fine. But it becomes more of a gamble when your resources are more limited to start. To slow down some of the strat use, you got to have those 2 command points for an interrupt if you're playing against and with a melee centric army. So it really makes you think about how you want to manage those command points. It does limit some of the super characters. Black Templars could take the sergeant who had 3 wounds and the bonkers like 3 or 4 damage power sword and all this other stuff, and it kind of limits that because it's like, okay, you can do that, but now you're starting with 2 command points instead of 4, or 1 instead of 6, or whatever. Again, you're still going to see it, and that's fine. It just kind of tones down some of the hero hammer a little bit. It really, in a lot of ways, puts the game where I like it best. Not that I didn't like it in Knockmend, but when we've toned down hero hammer and we've toned down strat use, this is where I like the game the best. Now, other people might disagree, and that's fine. And again, I still like the game even when we had Knockmend and it was the way it was. I just, so far, from what I've played in Nephilim, this is the interaction that I like the most. The only downside I see, and this is again from my opinion, is you're probably going to see more named characters because they tend to be more efficient. And what I mean by that is, like, especially ninth ed characters, they have warlord traits that are assigned to them, and they have to take them if they are your warlord. Well, for 1 command point, I can have this character who does everything. Abaddon's a great example. He's 300 points, so he's the same price as Gazgul. Not that we're comparing the two, I'm just saying, so he's a chunky unit. But he does everything a captain does. He does everything a lieutenant does, and he does everything a chapter master does. Now, the wound rerolls are limited to whoever gets the chapter master rerolls, and they're limited to Black Legion only. But for 300 points, I get a guy who's damn near impossible to remove from the field, who can kill just about anything he touches, and then for 1 command point, he gets all his warlord traits, and he also is a force multiplier for my army. Now, granted, he would still be an auto take at 300 points, even with different command point rules. It's just given the current command point rules, he just becomes that much more efficient. And that's probably true of other named characters. Again, coming from the orc perspective, most of their named characters are not worth the investment. Gazgul is fun, but I wouldn't play him in most competitive games. But again, that's also just me. So Marines have a lot of named characters. A lot of those are going to be more efficient than running a regular captain. Like if you have a named captain for your army, they're going to be about the same points, and now you get extra stuff for them because they get multiple warlord traits for 1 command point. So as long as they have the loadout you're looking for, they just become more efficient. And I see that as a con, not because it's actually a con, but again, it's just not the way I like to play. I don't like named characters in competitive games. I don't like that, for a lot of armies, they make these named characters so good and so efficient that you see them more often than you don't. Morven Vol's a good example. Like, a lot of Sisters lists ran her. I don't know if they still do. Again, Abaddon's a good example. Bobby G for Ultramarines. Like I haven't seen, even in tournaments that I've been to in the last 6 months, I haven't seen many Ultramarines lists that didn't have him. So it's like you have all these named characters and you make them so good and so efficient that like they're just in every list. And I prefer the kind of older way of doing it in that respect, where it's like I could just build my captain or whatever the way I wanted to. But that's not where we're at right now with the game, and that's okay. I'm just explaining why I feel like the name characters are a con. And it does hurt some armies more than others because certain armies just don't have the command point efficiency that others do. Guard are an 8th edition army, so they still have 8th edition command point costs for a lot of their stratagems. Uh, Orcs have a lot of 8th edition command point costs for their stratagems, even though they're a 9th ed army. Certain armies like Tau, I mentioned earlier, have a lot of regenerative abilities. They can just regenerate command points, which helps them. One of the armies, it was a Death Guard. I think it's the Tallyman. You roll 2 dice, and on a 7 up, you just get a command point in your command phase. So there's a good bunch of armies that help you either recover or generate new command points, and then you have other armies that basically don't have it at all, except being locked behind like faction lock. Like Orcs don't really have it unless you play Blood Axes, and if I remember right, the Blood Axes stuff is locked in DLC, so it's not even in the Codex. It's only in the extra books. So it's one of those where it's still not super balanced. I see that as a con. It does hurt some armies more than others. Overall, I think the army construction is neat. They kind of planned on people bringing bigger models, these big centerpiece models that you want to see, like your knights and your Gorkanauts and stuff. And they put a rule in place to help stop spamming hyper efficient transports. But the downside of that is that most Lords of War aren't very good. You know, some are better than others. You compare a Gorkanaut to a Storm Surge, they're roughly equivalent in points, but they are not equivalent in efficiency. So, and generally speaking, like I said, they're not very good because if they can be seen, they can be shot. You don't get to hide them so much. They kind of interact like aircraft. And I think that's another one of the reasons why, arguably, they're not getting as much play as they could. I think the changes to the secondary objectives is a good effort by Games Workshop to adjust points and objectives to help balance armies rather than just slapping them with nerf after nerf after nerf. To me, this is the way you balance the game. You've already written the rules, so if the rules are busted, start with points adjustments and then start with, then go on to other things. I always feel like the first attempt at balancing an army should be made with points adjustments, and then if that doesn't work, then we do rules altering. And again, going back to Tau, that was a bonkers book at release, but I had no issues with it being that bonkers. But crisis suits should not have been as cheap as they were. And then they finally put them up in points. But rather than just nerfing certain things in Tau, which they did, like, oh, we're just going to take core away from broadsides, give broadsides core again, and then just make them cost an extra 30 points a model. So if you want to take them, fine, but they're going to cost a lot of points. Start there, and then if that doesn't work, tweak rules. Like that would be personally my approach to it, and I feel like this is a good effort by Games Workshop to kind of take that approach. Let's rebalance everything by adjusting points and then tweaking secondary objectives to help balance scoring. Um, it does tone down some of the auto takes for armies. Like some armies, you just had objectives that you were taking every game, and they've gotten tweaked a little bit so that you kind of have to at least think about it. The multiple faction secondaries is a good change, especially because they rewrote them all rather than just being you get them out of the book. Like certain armies again had some that were real easy to score. So as an orc player looking at my secondaries and understanding that most of them weren't very good, it was real disconcerting to be playing against like Grey Knights who just have that Shadow Ops one where they're just like, hey, as long as I'm playing this game, I'm getting 15 points on it. So it's one of those real interesting kind of changes to see, and I like it. Uh, Again, the faction objectives are not balanced still, and that's okay. We don't need them to be perfectly balanced. because we do still have the general or generic ones. What I do like is that you can, at least for many of them, now plan around them instead of they're just trash and you're never going to take them. And again, like Get the Good Bits is a good example of that. You know, uh, it was like situational at best, and now you can actually build a list around scoring it consistently. So I like that change. Some armies have access to a wide variety of options. That's less relevant, because they put them in the book, but some armies just had more options. Now, I don't know if they did anything for the sub factions of Marines or not. I haven't looked that deep into it because, again, I'm not a Marine player. So if you are a Marine player, leave a comment in there and let me know. If not, I'll check back on it later and see. I think the intent of Nephilim was to get bigger stuff on the table, and it probably did to some degree, but I don't think it worked as well as Games Workshop thought it would. And that's just because they're still kind of unbalanced. You've got a 400-point model in one army and then a 400-point model in another army, and they are not equivalent. Necrons got a lot of love, which is awesome. They were widely considered a bottom tier army, and for them to be more relevant competitively, that's awesome. The secondary objective changes really help them, as well as just some core interaction changes. I haven't played as much in Nephilim as I want to, at least not in tournaments, but I do have some tournaments coming up that I'll be playing in and running, so that'll help me get a little bit more experience with it again. Feel like I'm a little late to the party, but we got there. As always, Patreon tiers, Hatchling $1.50, mentioned on the page. Firebird $5, 24-hour early access to all content and ability to vote on future content. Phoenix $10, you get all of the above and a Phoenix Gaming sticker set to you. And then the Immortal $20, you get all of that plus a t-shirt, and you get a special shout out at the end of the video. The one thing I will say, just so everybody understands, like the patrons that I have that are supporting me, that money goes right back into what I'm doing. So I used it to buy some streaming gear so that we start setting up streams. I used it to buy terrain so that I can have terrain for the events that I'm running, so I can stream at tables at the events I'm running. So this is all building up for bigger and better events and more things. So you guys are awesome. Thank you for supporting me. And I'll talk to you next time. And before we head out, let's give a shout out to our immortals, MilfSlayer69 and the real Donnie G. I'm going to change MilfSlayer69 at some point, but I'm having too much fun blasting him like this. So, again, thanks for listening. All the links in the description. Super awesome Teespring store. Has themed merch. Going to be working on getting new merch up soon. And then, obviously, all the other links like Patreon and stuff as well. Thanks, guys.